After 4 bloody years, the Great War is over. Germany has lost. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 strips the nation bare. No air force, no navy, and a standing army limited to just 100,000 men. Weapons production is forbidden, and tanks are especially banned. But while Germany is diminished, young officers recognise the potential of armoured warfare. During the 1920s and the early 30s, several officers from the German Armed Forces, or Reichswehr, were tasked with studying tactics and developments from the Great War, and were encouraged to study tank warfare. Although militarily and diplomatically isolated, an opportunity would come knocking on Germany's front door. In 1922, Germany entered a secret partnership with the Soviet Union. Hidden from Allied prying eyes, a base at the Kama Tank School in Kazan in the USSR became available. Here, German engineers and officers developed new tank designs and theory on armoured warfare. Among them was Heinz Guderian, one of the pioneering minds of the future Panzerwaffe. Studying British and French tank experiments along those being tested alongside the Russians in the USSR, he argued that tanks should never be used for infantry support. Instead, they should strike as independent armoured formations, smashing through enemy lines with the help of mechanised infantry and aircraft, exploiting the gap in the line, the core idea of what would later be called Blitzkrieg. When Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, he set Germany on a course of secret rearmament. The Luftwaffe, the Kriegsmarine, and now Wehrmacht now all slowly began being rebuilt. The early designs tested in Russia now rolled off the production line. The Gross tractor, light tractor, and finally the Panzer I. These were little more than training tanks, but they gave crews invaluable experience. Between 1933 and 1936, around 1,200 Panzer Is and a small amount of Panzer IIs were built, just in time to see combat in Spain. Germany's volunteer force, the Condor Legion, arrived en masse in Spain at the end of 1936 with a contingent of 7,000 men and 36 Panzer Is to aid Franco's fascist faction. During combat with the Republican troops, they met more of their match. Soviet-supplied T-26 tanks, armed with 45mm cannons. The Panzer I, armed with only 2 MG-13 machine guns, was hopelessly outclassed. It was a brutal but valuable lesson. German High Command realised that future tanks needed better armament and armour. The result helped implement changes for the development of the Panzer III and IV. By September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, the Panzerwaffe, although large in number, was still primitive. Of the 2,700 tanks committed, only 309 were the now modern Panzer III and IV, with decent armament and defensive armour. The rest were the now outdated Panzer Is and IIs. The campaign was a success, finishing on the 6th of October 1939, with Germany conquering and dividing Poland between themselves and the USSR. However, it came at a cost. More than 800 German tanks were knocked out during the invasion. Germany's Panzerwaffe suffered heavily to Poland's armour, such as the 7 TP light tank and its deadly 37mm Bofors anti-tank guns. Looking ahead to the campaigns in the Low Countries and France during the spring of 1940, the danger became clear. The French Char B1 Bis and the British Matilda II, let alone the anti-tank guns in their armouries. Against these heavily armoured beasts and powerful guns, Germany's early panzer force was hopelessly outclassed, and so began the search for alternatives, a need that would give birth to the tank destroyer. It was at this time, after Poland, that Germany started experimenting with the idea of the tank destroyer. Requirements from the Army High Command was that it was vital that it could reposition quickly along the front. Stalls found the Czech-made 47mm anti-tank gun were in abundance after the takeover of Czechoslovakia in 1938, as was the Panzer I's chassis. The Panzer I turret was removed and replaced with a fixed gun shield to protect both the crew and the anti-tank gun. The 47mm gun was mounted on a pedestal inside the fighting compartment, but it kept its original gun shield. Each vehicle typically carried 74 anti-tank rounds and 10 high explosive shells, only meant as a stopgap before better designs could be fielded. A total of 202 Panzerjäger I vehicles were built. The first batch of 132 was produced by Alket in 1940. The second batch of 70 included 10 built by Alket, with the remainder assembled by the Klockner Humboldt Deutz. Between 1940 and 1941, it was crewed by 3 consisting of a loader, a driver and a commander/gunner. It was pervious to small arms fire and anti-tank guns due to the armour being very thin, with the front being 5 to 13mm thick and the gun shield only being 1mm thicker. The open structured design also made the crew vulnerable to these factors. However, its 40mm pack gun could penetrate 50mm of armour accurately up to 500 metres, and with it still being able to engage targets further. Better than anything the Germans could field at this time. Essentially, the best way to describe the Panzerjäger I, it was a glass cannon. On the 10th of May 1940, Germany launched Case Gelb, or Case Yellow, the offensive against the Western Allies in France and the Lower Countries. At the start of the campaign, only the 521st Panzerjäger anti-tank battalion was fully combat ready, and it was assigned to Group von Kleist, the infamous army group that outflanked the Maginot Line through the Ardennes. The Panzerjäger I proved itself as an effective weapon during the French campaign. After-action reports highlighted that its 47mm gun could penetrate the armour of most Allied tanks up to ranges of 500 metres. It did struggle piercing through Allied heavies, however, only effectively knocking them out either at close range or using special APCR ammunition. Although primarily designated as an anti-tank vehicle, it was frequently used as an assault gun, being used to attack machine gun nests and other fortified positions, much like that of the Stug 3A assault gun. A report from the 18th Infantry Division specifically emphasises the vehicle's battlefield effectiveness. The 47mm pack has proven itself to be very effective, not only against tanks, but also against buildings during urban combat. It had a significant physical and demoralising effect on the enemy. However, the flaws in the Panzer I chassis design came back to bite the Panzerjäger I. The warm French weather of May meant drivers couldn't go more than 30 km an hour due to the risk of the engine overheating and catching fire. This resulted in a lot of the Jaeger 1s being left behind the advance for repairs. A lack of sights for the crew meant crew members had to peek over the faceplate to get a better field of view, making them vulnerable to sniper fire and artillery. The Battle of France, however, was a major success for the tank destroyers. They would next see combat in North Africa in 1941, but weren't as effective there due to the little cover the terrain offered, making them vulnerable to air attack. At the time of Operation Barbarossa in June of 1941, 135 vehicles were available across 5 battalions, but the initial first few days of the attack saw little tank engagements with the Soviets, mainly being pressed into assault gun roles, attacking enemy strong points and supporting the infantry. When they did come across Soviet vehicles, the results were mixed. In one engagement near Voronezh, a Soviet BT-7 tank rammed the Panzerjäger I whilst being hit itself twice and engulfed in flames. The Panzerjäger somehow survived and was towed away. With the ever-increasing numbers of T-34 and KV-1 tanks appearing on the battlefield as the German army marched further into Russia, the effectiveness of the Panzerjäger I was drastically being weakened. By 1942, many were taken off frontline duty and moved into storage to make way for the better armed Marder II and 3 tank destroyers. Just a quick snippet before we end the story of this weird and wonderful tank. The story doesn't totally end here. During the dying days of the war in April of 1945, as the Battle of Berlin raged, a curious photograph was taken within the area of the Friedrichshain Flak Tower. A single Panzer I mounted with a 75mm Stuck 40 cannon. No one knows anything about this vehicle, but it can be assumed it was a last-ditch conversion in the death throes of the Third Reich, but I just thought it was an interesting addition to the story. Thanks for watching, guys. Please like and subscribe for more content like this, and be sure to check out my other videos here. I've been Lemon Cat. I'll see you in the next video. Bye now.